Hey, what's up, family? What's going on? It's your boy Radical Latino. Now, listen, this is a video that was uploaded by Truth Teacher. You know, my dude, Truth Teacher, up in his channel. So I'm re-uploading it on my channel. Not only that, but look at the timestamp that he did it. 34 minutes. And I told y'all, I be telling him in front of his face and all that he be long winded as shit. Doesn't get to the goddamn point. So what I ended up doing besides me uploading this video on my channel, I edited all the long-windedness and all the nonsense that doesn't need to be in the goddamn video. So this is still the same video, but the non-long-winded version, okay? I made sure I made it short as possible. You know, it's 20 something minutes outside of 34 minutes. So I took off all the dead air, all the nonsense, and just getting straight to the point, all right? Hope you guys enjoy. Peace.
Hey everybody, how you doing? It's me again, Truth Teacher, coming at you with another video. So I'm sure by now everyone is aware of the events of the past few weeks with the mass shooter in Atlanta who killed several Asian women. A manifestation of a much larger trend that's been happening nationwide, where Asian people have been targeted in violent ways. It's really disturbing to see what's been happening because it's just a manifestation of the nastiness that we've been experiencing for the past 4 years. And I'm not going to say that this is all because of, that person whose name I refuse to mention, who was in the White House. But even since the Obama administration, there's been this uptick of hatred, people of non-European ancestry. And a lot of people would like to deny that this is happening, that this is a thing. When you mention white supremacy, there's certain people, even people of color, who get all defensive. This idea, it's a psychological disturbance. It's an emotional thing, right? It's an ideation that's very, very contagious. And unfortunately, a lot of people of let's just say people who are not exclusively of European descent, a lot of us have internalized the propaganda and the hatred that's been leveled at us, and we turn it outward against other people, right? So even though the people who have been most visibly affected by white supremacy and white supremacist violence in this country have been people of African descent, we've seen in the past few weeks people of African descent who've been acting out violently against certain Asian people. We have to be honest about this, that within the Asian community itself, there has been a problem of people who have adopted white supremacist ideologies, ideations, and have perpetuated anti-black ideas. We've seen it most dramatically in certain Asian-owned businesses, particularly beauty supply stores and things of that nature. There's always been this tension between the Asian, or let me say, certain people within the Asian community and people of African descent. It grieves me because people are just so forgetful of history. I mean, when you do that, don't you realize that you're doing the job of white supremacy? You're doing their work for them.
Done with you Asians who think having a race war with the black community is in our favor. No, it fucking is not. And y'all always want to bring up black people attacking Asians during the post-COVID era, which has happened a few times, but guess what, bitch? There are gonna be bad people in every race. Remember, anti-Asian is always rooted in white supremacy, but a person of any race can be influenced by white supremacy. So those black people that attacked us were subscribing to the white supremacist narrative that Asians caused COVID. And if you blame black people as a whole for the anti-Asian hate crimes, you're subscribing to the white supremacist narrative that black people are inherently aggressive. And y'all Asians who are like, why aren't black people standing with us? Bitch, be grateful because they've always stood with us. Frederick Douglass in 1882 made the time to openly denounce the Chinese Exclusion Act while the black community was going through so much, such as rampant lynchings against them. They worked hand in hand with us to free the Japanese people in the internment camps in 1942, and we directly benefited from black-led civil rights movements every single time. So stop blaming and demanding things from them, and unlearn your anti-blackness first.
I'm Asian Canadian, but from an Asian American perspective, we can't talk about this without talking about the model minority myth. So what I was asking my friend Nancy Wong Yuan about this morning was, how we women, Asian women, are seen. Doesn't that intersect with the model minority myth? The model minority myth, you and I have talked about this before, which places us into this box of being submissive, politically pliable, right? We will not fight back. We will not raise our voices. And then, of course, creates this horrible wedge between, I call it my yellow community, between the Asian community and the Black community. And I do want to speak on that because I know that there has been some framing that a lot of the perpetrators of this anti-Asian violence have been Black and brown. And to anybody out there, and especially my fellow yellows, to my Asian brothers and sisters, if you take this as an opportunity to think about, to propagate anti-Blackness or anti-brownness, you are doing exactly what the dominant culture wants us to do. You're a pawn of white supremacy. You don't understand the most fundamental law of governing one of them, which is divide and conquer. And if anybody in my community questions the allyship of the Black community, you're wrong. Where have you been? I mean, again, I'm not a historian, but I know how long Black folks have been allies of Asian folks. I know that there are Asian folks that have been allies of Black folks. But this again, Karen, to your point about telling your story, these are narratives that white supremacy wants to erase because there is fear in that. Judas and the Black Messiah, what I thought was so powerful about it was, and I did not know this, was watching Fred Hampton go, okay, you, we all look different, but we are all being oppressed, right? By the levers of whiteness, by privilege of capitalism. And thus, he was so dangerous. And I think it's really important for us to examine our own biases, and we all have them. We all do. And to interrogate those and to bring them up and say, okay, how do I get better at this? Sophia Chang, how do you think differently after you've internalized all of this garbage? How do you purge it? You've already digested it and metabolized it. How do we now get it out of our systems? And again, the work is hard, and it means that we take a hard look in the mirror and say, oh, okay, what I thought 10 years ago, I don't think now. What I said 5 years ago, I don't say now, right?
If you are a person of color, quote unquote, and I hate using these terms, people of color, minority, all of this shit, I really hate that, but let's just say if you are a person who is not from the class in this country that's been labeled as white, and we're talking mostly people who are exclusively of European ancestry, right? You're doing their job for them. Understand that what we're calling white supremacy is really a mechanism of a class system. It's a mechanism of social control that was created by the ruling elites in this country, okay? So please miss me with the bullshit that this doesn't exist. We all know it exists. Everybody who has two brain cells to rub together knows that it exists. But at the same time, we're not saying all white people are like this. No. But there are most definitely a lot of white people who do have this mentality. And it was created specifically by the ruling class for the purpose of social control. And the best way that they can control everyone is to create an atmosphere of mistrust and hatred amongst each other. So that we're so busy fighting against each other, we're not busy looking at the ways that all of us are being disenfranchised by the status quo. And they get to sit back and just look at us tearing each other to shreds and just laugh. What I'm hoping comes out of this is that people in the Asian community get your wake-up call. Come on, man. Stop forgetting your history. You know, it wasn't that long ago that in this country there were laws on the books excluding Asians from migrating to this country. There's still people alive today who remember that. There's still people alive today who were interned in concentration camps during World War II. Asians, historically in this country, were the only group of people who were specifically targeted on the basis of race to be excluded from migrating to this country. But yet and still, you have people in the Asian community who, okay, yes, some of the people who perpetuated violence against Asians were African American or people of African descent, whatever, yes. How are you going to use that as an excuse to engage in anti-Black rhetoric against the African American community? Do you forget that in this country, it wasn't African Americans who legislated anti-Asian immigration policies? It wasn't African Americans who engaged in massacres of Asian people out in California and in the Midwest. It wasn't African Americans that burned Asians out of their homes and burnt their homes down with them inside of it. It wasn't African Americans that burnt down Asian businesses and forced them out because they were afraid of competition. Those were all manifestations of white supremacy. And African Americans were the same people who were being victimized by those people who had these ideations. And don't forget that it was African Americans who stood up when Asians were being excluded and said, this is not fair. It was African Americans who stood up and protested when Japanese were being interned in concentration camps. And it was because of African Americans that exclusionary policies against Asians could be overturned, and immigration in general, that people could not be discriminated against on the basis of race. It was because of African Americans that if you're being discriminated against racially, you have at least the opportunity to take it to the courts and fight against. Let's just realize what's going on here. Learn your history, the history of Asians in this country, and stop being so goddamn myopic that you can only fucking see with blinders on like this, so that you can't connect the dots and see how we're all being affected by the holdovers of this bygone era, this legacy that is still with us, that we're working to get rid of and to get over. We all got work to do. And there's too many of you. I'm sorry, but there's just too many of you who you just have amnesia. Or maybe your families came here very recently and that's why you're ignorant of the history of this country and what happened. And you think that by being anti-Black, somehow that can make you white adjacent and you'll get accepted into the power structure. Well, how's that working for you? A lot of you voted for Trump, even though you heard the rhetoric that he was speaking, because he wasn't saying it against Asians at the time. He was talking about Black people. He was talking about Latinos, Mexicans. And you're like, oh, well, that's not me. That's not me. And you still went and voted for him? because you don't understand that what you were seeing was a depraved disregard for human decency. And that if they can do it to this group of people over here, they can do it to you too. You all went and voted for him. Well, how did that work out for you? How's it working now? Look at where we are now, where you have a nut job can walk up into 3 different Asian businesses and kill all these Asian women with the exception of 2 people. And I believe at least one of those people was a Latino. The other person, he might have been Latino. I'm not quite sure what his ethnic background is, but regardless, do you understand what's happening now? Are you able to connect the dots and see that if there's one group of people in this society who is being targeted unfairly, that we're all in danger? So for my brothers and sisters out there, whether you identify as Black or African American or ADOS or whatever it is, you know, you're part of the African diaspora, listen, let me tell you something. We do not have the luxury of feeding into this anti-Asian propaganda. This is all bullshit. Because the same kind of hatred that's stirring up this anti-Asian sentiment is the exact same mentality that will turn against us and is turned against us. It's all connected. And for my Latino brothers and sisters out there who want to walk around with your heads up your ass, denying that there is such a thing as white supremacy and racism. Oh, I'm not a victim. I don't have a victim mentality. It's not about having a victim mentality. Just because you acknowledge the problem doesn't mean you're being a victim. It's not about, you know, looking at all crazy at everybody who's white. No. And it's not about being a victim. Even though I recognize the fact that this does exist, I am not a victim. White supremacy and racism is not going to stop me from getting where I need to be in life. So no, I am not a victim, and I am not here preaching victim mentality. But I am saying that there is a problem in this society that is a holdover from the past. And we have to do our work right now to make sure that we eradicate it so that the next generations who come after us will have a better time of it. Things have gotten better. They certainly have. They have gotten better. But the people who have this mentality, people who have white supremacist ideologies, they do not like to see what is happening in the society. They do not like to see the change that is happening, and they're fighting back. They're trying to make a last stand effort to impose their will and their view of the world on everybody else and society. They're trying to bring us back to the way things used to be back in ye olden days, the good old days. You know what they say about the good old days? They was old, but they wasn't so good. That's what they're trying to do. They want to bring us back to that time when they were on top because for some reason they feel threatened. When they see African Americans thriving and prospering and succeeding, they feel threatened. When they see Asians prospering and advancing and thriving, they feel threatened. When they see Latinos prospering and thriving, they feel threatened. So we don't have the luxury to sit here and just because it's not happening to our group at the moment think, oh, well, are you sure that's really racism? Are you sure? Come on, man. Dude went into 3 different establishments. And all 3 of them were Asian establishments? All 3 of them? And all the people that you killed, with the exception of 2, all of them were Asian? And we can't identify if this was racially motivated? Oh, well, you know, he had a sex addiction. He had a bad day. He had a bad day. He had a bad day? This motherfucker's still alive. He had a bad day? Nah, don't give me that fucking bullshit. He didn't have a bad day. The people who are dead, they're the ones that had a bad day that day, not him. You know, y'all didn't stop any effort, you know, to dismantle the Black Panther Party, the Brown Berets, the Young Lords. The FBI spared no expense to dismantle them and all other progressive groups. But you got, yet and still, you have paramilitary white nationalist organizations existing in this country right now. And nobody's doing anything to break them up? Make it make sense. Make it make sense. You got these groups out here that are fully armed, armed to the teeth. Pull your head out of your ass, man. So listen, for the rest of us, what is it going to take for you to wake up? Of us in the Asian community, you need to wake up and realize what is going on, what has always been going on, and make sure you do your best not to feed into it. If you're one of these people who is feeding into anti-black racism, you're part of the problem that is turning back on your own people. If you are African American who's feeding into this anti-Asian propaganda and going out there and beating up people, you're part of the problem that is feeding the racism and the oppression that's coming back on your people. If you're African American and you're one of these assholes going out here targeting Latino people and beating them up randomly, you are part of the problem. You have internalized white supremacist propaganda, and you are part of the problem that it turns around and hurts your own people. If you are Latino and you're in this country and you are promoting anti-black propaganda, anti-Asian propaganda, anti-Native American propaganda, you are part of the problem and part of the system that turns around and oppresses your people. You are all part of the problem. You are all complicit. You are all doing their work for them, and it needs to stop. Needless to say, if you're a white person and you're going along with this crap, you're part of the problem, but you already know that. So, for those of you who have been labeled white by this society, and you are not of that mindset, then it behooves you, when you hear this crap, don't let it slide. You need to check the people in your community and put them in their place and put them on blast and let them know this bullshit is not okay.